The laptop screen glowed, a sterile portal into a world of sharp suits and sharper words. Naima's home office, a space of minimalist gray and glass, felt like a remote outpost of her corporate empire. From the doorway, Darius watched her, his wife of 6 months, a titan in her element. Her natural hair was pulled back in an elegant updo, her voice calm and measured as she dismantled an opponent's argument. She was luminous, a queen on a digital throne. He held a small tray with a steaming mug of ginger tea and a single biscuit. He knew she hadn't eaten. He approached silently, placing it on the corner of her desk, a small offering of warmth in a world of cold data. She looked up, and the CEO vanished. For a fleeting second, it was just Naima, her eyes softening with a gratitude that always humbled him. She gave his hand a quick, firm squeeze, a silent thank you that spoke volumes. The meeting droned on. A fire alarm test was scheduled in their building, and she needed to move to the back patio to avoid the noise. "One moment, everyone," she said, her voice reclaiming its professional polish. She clicked the mute button on the screen, or so she thought, and then rose, carrying her laptop toward the glass doors. Darius remained, tidying the desk, his movements economical and quiet. He was about to leave when a voice, slick with condescension, crackled from the laptop speakers. "Is she gone? Good." It was Marcus Vance, a senior board member whose ambition was a poorly tailored suit he wore everywhere. Another voice chuckled. "Seriously, Naima," Marcus continued, his tone dripping with a false concern that was more venomous than outright malice. "This new husband of hers, is that the man who cleans the floors at the community center? The janitor? I mean, it's a noble profession for some. But for you? You can do so much better. It's a matter of image, of perception." The words didn't crash over Darius. They slid into him like ice splinters, cold and sharp and painfully familiar. He didn't flinch. He didn't react at all. His face, a canvas of quiet dignity, remained placid. He had heard variations of that sentiment his whole life. It was the background radiation of his existence, the quiet hum of being measured by a uniform, a job title, a tax bracket, and never by the substance of his character. He looked at the screen, at the small, smirking face of Marcus Vance, a man who lived in a world of polished surfaces and saw nothing underneath. It wasn't anger he felt. It was a profound and weary sadness. He had thought with Naima that he had finally built a life beyond that judgment, a sanctuary where he was seen. The poison had found a way in. He picked up the empty tray and turned, his work boots making no sound on the hardwood floor. He walked out of the office, closing the door gently behind him, leaving the disembodied voice to echo in the silent room. Naima would return, unaware of the breach, unaware that the walls of their carefully constructed world had just been tested. And in that moment of careless cruelty, a choice began to form. Not in the man who spoke with such casual disdain, but in the quiet, noble heart of the man who listened. His life and hers was about to change forever. 6 months earlier, Darius's world was a universe contained within a 2-bedroom apartment in a historically black neighborhood of Philadelphia. His life was a rhythm, a steady beat of devotion and responsibility. It began before dawn in the quiet blue light that filtered through the window of his daughter's room. Amara. She was 6 years old, a supernova of energy and questions, the center of his orbit. He would stand in her doorway and just watch her sleep. The gentle rise and fall of her chest, her hair in beautiful twists spread across the pillow. In those moments, the ever-present ache of his wife Lena's absence would soften, replaced by a fierce, protective love that was the most real thing he knew. Mornings were their sacred ritual. While Amara was still dreaming of space princesses and talking squirrels, Darius would move through their small but immaculate home. He'd put on a pot of coffee, its rich aroma filling the kitchen. He'd pack Amara's lunch, cutting her sandwich into a star shape, just as Lena used to. Every action was imbued with memory, with love. By the time Amara padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her pink unicorn pajamas rumpled, breakfast would be on the table. Oatmeal with a smiley face, drawn in honey. "Daddy," she'd mumble, climbing onto her chair, "did you know that butterflies taste with their feet?" "I did not know that, sweet pea," he'd say, his voice a low, warm rumble. "That's a good fact for the day." After breakfast came the ritual of hair. He would sit Amara on a stool between his knees, a collection of colorful beads and hair ties on the coffee table. His hands, calloused and strong from his work as the head custodian at the Northwood Community Academy, were surprisingly gentle. He was no expert. He still struggled with the more intricate styles Lena had mastered effortlessly. But he learned. He watched videos. He practiced. He could do beautiful twists and neat puffs, and he took immense pride in the way Amara's beaded braids would click and bounce when she ran. It was more than just hair. It was a connection to her mother, a daily act of love he could perform, a tangible piece of her heritage he could tend to. His own appearance was just as deliberate. His work uniform was always pressed, his boots clean. His short, natural hair was always freshly trimmed. It was about respect. Respect for himself, for his work, for the example he was setting for his daughter. He was a black man raising a little black girl on his own, and he carried that responsibility with a quiet, unshakable grace. He wanted her to see strength, dignity, and pride in him, in them. His job at the school was more than a paycheck. It was a community. He knew the names of every teacher, every student. He was the one who fixed the broken swing, who found the lost lunchbox, who always had a kind word for a child having a rough day. He took pride in the gleaming floors, the clean classrooms, the small garden he maintained in the courtyard. It was his domain, and he cared for it meticulously. He was largely invisible to the wealthy parents who occasionally swept through for fundraisers, but he was a cornerstone to the people who spent their days within those walls. He didn't need accolades. The simple, unfiltered affection from his daughter was all the validation he ever required. His life was not large, but it was full. It was full of Amara's breathless, run-on sentences, the smell of crayons, the weight of her small hand in his. It was a life built on the foundations of a profound loss, but a life he had rebuilt, brick by loving brick, into a home. Miles away, in a different galaxy of existence, Naima Clark presided over her own kingdom. Her office was on the 54th floor of a gleaming glass tower that pierced the Philadelphia skyline. From her desk, she could see the entire city spread out below her, a map of her success. She was the CEO of Omnicore, a tech logistics firm she had built from the ground up. She was brilliant, commanding, and impeccably dressed in tailored suits that were a form of armor. Her deep brown skin was luminous under the recessed lighting, her natural hair styled with an intention that communicated power and control. Her world was one of numbers, projections, and strategic decisions. Her days were a series of back-to-back meetings in sterile boardrooms with glass walls and men who both respected and feared her. She spoke in precise, controlled sentences, her language corporate and clipped. She had a reputation as an ice queen, a woman who had sacrificed everything for her career. The reputation was not entirely inaccurate. She had sacrificed. Her evenings were a stark contrast to her days of power. She would return to her penthouse, a vast, silent space of white marble and minimalist furniture. It looked more like a gallery than a home. There were no crayon drawings on the refrigerator, no scuffed shoes by the door, no clutter of a life being lived. There was just silence, and the glittering, indifferent lights of the city outside her floor-to-ceiling windows. She would eat a perfectly prepared, nutritionally balanced meal alone at a dining table that could seat 12. Loneliness was a quiet, constant companion, a ghost that sat in the empty chairs. Her backstory wound was not a single sharp trauma, but the slow, grinding pressure of conditional love. Her parents, both respected academics, had valued achievement above all else. Love was a reward for good grades, for prestigious internships, for professional success. She had never been loved simply for being Naima. Her last serious relationship had ended when her fiancé, a man from a similarly powerful family, had admitted during a fight that he loved what she represented, not who she was. The admission had been a devastating confirmation of her deepest fear, that she was not a person to be loved, but an asset to be acquired. So she had built her walls higher, her armor thicker. She had poured all of her energy, all of her brilliance, into her work, the one area where her value was quantifiable and undeniable. But in the quiet hours of the night, staring out at the city she had conquered, she knew something was profoundly missing. She had a life, but she wasn't living. She commanded respect but yearned for authentic connection. She was a powerhouse, guarded, and utterly alone. The two worlds, the warm, small apartment in West Philadelphia and the cold, vast penthouse downtown, were destined to collide. The point of impact was a place they both knew, the Northwood Community Academy. Omnicore was the primary sponsor of the school's annual fundraising gala, a glittering affair designed to extract large checks from the city's elite. For Naima, it was a professional obligation. For Darius, it was the busiest night of the year. Naima moved through the crowded gymnasium, which had been transformed with draping fabric and twinkling lights. She smiled, she shook hands, she delivered a speech that was both inspiring and commanding. But she felt a familiar sense of dislocation, of playing a part. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulation. Feeling suffocated, she slipped out a side door, seeking a moment of quiet. She found herself in the small courtyard garden. It was a simple, beautiful space, with rose bushes and a stone bench illuminated by a single, soft lamp. It felt real, a pocket of peace in the midst of the performative chaos inside. She took a deep breath, the cool night air a welcome relief. But as she stepped off the paved path onto the soft earth to get a closer look at a particularly vibrant bloom, the heel of her expensive shoe sank into the ground. She lost her balance, twisting her ankle with a sickening crunch. A sharp, searing pain shot up her leg. She cried out, stumbling against the brick wall, her composure finally shattering. She was alone, in the dark, in pain, and utterly helpless. Darius was on his final rounds, his heavy keyring jingling softly at his hip. He heard the small cry, and his senses immediately sharpened. He moved toward the courtyard, his steps quiet but purposeful. He saw a figure leaning against the wall, a black woman in an elegant evening gown, her face contorted in pain. He didn't see the CEO of Omnicore. He didn't see the designer dress or the diamond earrings. He saw a person who was hurt. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Naima looked up, startled. A tall, brown-skinned man in a custodian's uniform stood before her. His presence was solid, reassuring. There was no pity in his eyes, only a quiet, gentle concern. I think I twisted my ankle," she managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. He knelt beside her without a word. "Let me see." His touch was surprisingly gentle as he examined her ankle, his large, calloused hands surprisingly deft. "It's swelling up pretty good. We need to get some ice on it." He looked around. "Stay here." It wasn't a request. It was a gentle command, a promise of care. He disappeared for a few minutes and returned with a first aid kit and a clean towel filled with ice. He expertly wrapped her ankle, his movements efficient and practiced. Then he did something that completely disarmed her. He opened a thermos he was carrying and poured a steaming, fragrant liquid into the cap. "Here," he said. "Drink this. It's ginger tea. My daughter says it fixes everything." She took the cup, her fingers brushing against his. The warmth spread through her hands, up her arms. She sipped the tea. It was sweet and spicy, and it felt like home, a home she'd never really had. And in that moment, something inside her broke. A small act of unconditional kindness from a complete stranger who wanted nothing, who expected nothing, who simply saw someone in pain and offered comfort. It was a purer form of care than she had received in her entire life. Tears she hadn't even known were there began to stream down her face. She didn't sob. She just wept. Silent tears of exhaustion, of loneliness, of a deep, unfulfilled yearning. Darius didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't try to offer platitudes. He just sat on the ground a few feet away, giving her space, his quiet presence a silent vigil. He understood that some wounds had nothing to do with a sprained ankle. When her tears subsided, he simply said, "It's okay." And for the first time in years, she believed it. The next morning, Naima woke up in her silent penthouse with a throbbing ankle and a restless mind. The encounter in the garden felt like a dream, a strange, warm interlude in her otherwise sterile life. She sent her assistant to the school with an absurdly expensive gift basket and a thank you note addressed to the evening custodian. But the gesture felt hollow, transactional. It didn't capture the profound sense of gratitude she felt. The man's name was Darius Miller, her assistant informed her. He had a daughter, Amara, in the 1st grade. A week later, her ankle still in a brace, Naima found herself driving to Northwood. She told herself she was there to check on Omnicore's investment, to see the results of the gala's fundraising firsthand. It was a flimsy excuse, and she knew it. She parked her luxury sedan across the street and watched the children playing during recess. It was a world away from her own, vibrant and chaotic and full of life. A little girl with braids and colorful beads that bounced when she jumped caught her eye. She was drawing on the pavement with chalk, her tongue stuck out in concentration. Naima felt an inexplicable pull. She got out of the car, her movements awkward in the medical boot, and limped toward the playground fence. The little girl looked up, her bright eyes wide with curiosity. "You have a robot foot," she declared. Naima couldn't help but smile. "Sort of. I hurt my ankle." "My daddy fixes things," the girl said, matter-of-factly. "He fixed the seesaw, and Mrs. Gable's squeaky chair, and a lady's ankle last week. She was wearing a sparkly dress. Was that you?" Naima's breath caught. Yes, it was. Your daddy is a very kind man." "I know," the girl said, beaming with pride. "I'm Amara. My daddy is the best fixer in the whole world." Just then, Darius came out of the school building carrying a toolbox. He stopped short when he saw her. He looked different in the daylight, his work uniform simple but neat, his dark brown skin glowing in the afternoon sun. He looked strong and tired and kind. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice hesitant. "What are you doing here?" "Naima, please," she corrected him automatically. I was just in the neighborhood, and I wanted to thank you again properly." The interaction was awkward, a collision of their two vastly different worlds. But Amara, with the unfiltered honesty of a child, bridged the gap. She grabbed Naima's hand with her chalky fingers. "Daddy, can she come for pancakes? I'm making pancakes tomorrow. They're going to be circle-shaped, mostly. Darius looked mortified. But Naima laughed. It was a genuine laugh, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. It felt like a crack in her carefully constructed armor. "I would love that," she said, looking directly at Darius. The pancake breakfast was a study in warm, domestic chaos. Darius's apartment was small, filled with Amara's artwork, stacks of books, and the scent of cinnamon. It felt more like a home than her penthouse ever had. Amara presented Naima with a pancake that was slightly burnt and shaped more like a cloud than a circle. It was the most delicious thing Naima had ever eaten. She sat on their comfortable, slightly worn couch and listened to Amara's breathless, run-on sentences about her favorite dinosaur, her best friend, and the secret life of ladybugs. Darius watched them, a small, tentative smile on his face. This became the start of a new, unspoken routine. Naima found more and more reasons to be near the school. One afternoon, she was trying to work from her car, a crucial deadline looming, when her laptop battery died. She saw Darius locking up for the day. On an impulse, she asked if there was anywhere she could plug in for an hour. He didn't hesitate. He led her to his small, tidy custodian's office in the school basement. It was a simple room, but it was quiet. He made her a cup of tea and left her to work. Amara, finished with her after-school program, found her there. She didn't interrupt. She simply curled up on a small cot in the corner with a book, and soon she was fast asleep. Later, Naima looked over and saw the little girl sleeping peacefully. Without thinking, she moved to the cot, and Amara, in her sleep, shifted, resting her head in Naima's lap. The simple, trusting weight of the child was a profound anchor. It grounded her in a way her billions of dollars never could. When Darius returned, he found them like that. The powerful CEO, her laptop forgotten, gently stroking his daughter's hair. The sight was so tender, so unexpectedly right, that it took his breath away. He didn't speak. She didn't move. The room held its breath. That evening, they talked. Really talked. He sat in his desk chair and she remained on the cot, Amara still asleep beside her. He told her about Lena, about her sudden illness, about the gaping hole she'd left behind. He spoke of her not with performing grief, but with a quiet, abiding love. His longest speech was about his daughter, about his hopes and fears for her. In the safety of that small, quiet room, Naima found the courage to be vulnerable. She spoke of her own gilded cage, of the crushing weight of her parents' expectations, of the profound loneliness that haunted her success. She had been in penthouses, luxury spas, and corporate boardrooms. None of those places had felt as safe as this humble basement office. It was a shared wound, a quiet exchange of pain that forged a bond deeper than any she had ever known. He didn't offer solutions or judgments. He just listened. He saw her. Not the CEO, not the powerhouse. Just Naima, a woman yearning to belong. Their bond grew in the small spaces, in the quiet moments, a shared look over Amara's head, a lingering touch when he handed her a cup of tea. He fixed the wobbly leg on her antique desk at the penthouse. She helped Amara with a school project, her sharp mind finding joy in explaining the life cycle of a butterfly. She started leaving her power suits in the closet, opting for softer clothes when she knew she would see them. He started smiling more, a deep, genuine smile that reached his tired eyes. They were building a fragile, beautiful world, a world of burnt pancakes and quiet conversations, a world that felt real and true. They were falling in love, not with a grand declaration, but with 1,000 small acts of service. And then came the video call. The two worlds they had tried so hard to keep separate collided with brutal force. Marcus Vance's voice, a serpent in their garden, spoke the cold, cruel truth of how the outside world would always see them. A powerful woman and the janitor. A mismatch, a mistake. When Naima returned to her office, flushed from the success of her call, she found it empty. The teacup was gone. A chill went through her. She looked at the screen, at the glowing green light indicating her microphone was active. She rewound the meeting recording. Her blood ran cold as she heard Marcus's words, then the soft, almost imperceptible sound of the door closing. He had heard. Darius had heard everything. She found him on the small balcony of his apartment, a place that had become their shared sanctuary. He was staring up at the star-dusted sky, his shoulders heavy. The vibrant, bustling noise of the neighborhood below seemed a world away. "Darius," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry. I forgot to mute." He didn't turn to look at her. His voice, when it came, was quiet, devoid of anger, which was somehow worse. It was filled with a deep, familiar resignation. "It's not your fault, Naima. It's what they see. What people like him will always see, a uniform, a job. They don't see a man. They don't see a father." He finally turned, and the look in his eyes pierced her to the core. It was not accusation. It was pain. I hoped our world was different." The poison was in. The judgment of her world had seeped under the door and was threatening to suffocate the beautiful, fragile thing they were building. She realized with sickening clarity that the threat wasn't Marcus. The threat was her life, her title, her entire world. It was a world that would never make space for a man like Darius, a world that would only ever try to diminish him. In the days that followed, a coolness grew between them. It wasn't intentional. It was the chilling effect of that overheard cruelty. Darius was as kind as ever, but a wall was back up, a quiet retreat into himself to protect his heart. Naima threw herself back into work, her armor firmly back in place, but it felt different now. Brittle, hollow. Marcus, meanwhile, sensed a shift. He saw Naima's distraction, her newfound vulnerability, as an opportunity. He began a subtle campaign of whispers and rumors among the board members. He spoke of Naima's questionable judgment and uncharacteristic lack of focus. He framed it as concern for the company, but it was a pure power play. The final move was a proposed merger with a European conglomerate. It was a brilliant financial move, one that would cement Omnicore's global dominance. It would also require the CEO to relocate to London for at least 2 years. It was his way of trying to sever her connection to Philadelphia, to the life she was trying to build. He was forcing her to choose. The board meeting was held in the main conference room on the 54th floor. The long, polished table reflected the faces of 10 powerful men and 1 powerful woman. Naima, at the head of the table, felt like she was on trial. Marcus presented the merger details with a smug confidence. It was a good deal, an undeniable deal from a business perspective. When he finished, he looked directly at Naima. "Of course," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "A move of this magnitude requires a CEO with absolute focus, someone whose personal life reflects the unimpeachable image of the company. We need to ensure there are no distractions." The word hung in the air, a thinly veiled insult. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. They all knew the rumors. Naima looked at their faces, men who measured life in stock prices and market share. She thought of Darius's hands, calloused from work but gentle enough to braid a child's hair. She thought of Amara's drawing, a lopsided, smiling sun, taped to the stainless steel door of her refrigerator. She thought of the taste of ginger tea in a quiet garden. She thought of what it felt like to be truly seen. A quiet certainty settled over her. She stood up, her posture regal. The room fell silent. She didn't look at Marcus. She looked at each member of the board, her gaze clear and steady. "You're right, Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Image is important, but you are all measuring the wrong things. You measure profit margins and quarterly growth. For the past few months, I've been learning to measure other things like kindness and integrity and worth." She paused, letting the words sink in. The true worth of a man isn't in his title or his bank account. It's in his character. It's in the way he loves his child. It's in the quiet dignity with which he moves through the world. She picked up the merger proposal, a thick stack of papers representing the culmination of her life's work. "This is a good deal for the company," she said calmly. "But it's not a good deal for me. My life is not for sale. My heart is not open for negotiation." She looked directly at Marcus, and for the first time he saw not the Ice Queen, but a woman of unshakable strength. "I tender my resignation, effective immediately." She placed the papers gently on the table. She didn't slam them down. There was no anger, no drama, just quiet certainty. She turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. She walked past her corner office without a backward glance, got in the elevator, and descended from her glass tower for the last time. She wasn't falling, she was flying. She drove straight to the school, the city blurring past her windows. She didn't feel loss. She felt a profound sense of liberation, of lightness. She had shed the armor, and she was finally, fully herself. She found Darius where she knew he would be, in the courtyard garden, tending to the roses. The late afternoon sun spilled through the leaves, casting a golden glow on his dark skin. He was on his knees, carefully pruning a bush, his focus absolute. He looked up as she approached, his eyes widening in surprise. She wasn't wearing a power suit. She was in a simple yellow dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful. She looked free. "I quit," she said, her voice soft but clear. He slowly rose to his feet, wiping the dirt from his hands onto his work pants. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his gaze searching her face, trying to understand the enormity of her words. Just then, the school doors burst open and Amara came running out, her beaded braids bouncing, a piece of paper clutched in her hand. "Naima!" she squealed with delight, launching herself into Naima's arms. Naima hugged her tight, burying her face in the child's hair, breathing in the scent of shampoo and sunshine. "Are you staying for dinner?" Amara asked, her face alight with hope. Then she leaned in and whispered the question that held the weight of the entire universe. "Are you staying forever?" Tears welled in Naima's eyes. She knelt down so she was eye level with the little girl. She looked past her at Darius, who was watching them, his heart in his eyes. "I would like that very much," Naima whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "If it's okay with your daddy." Darius closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He knelt beside her, his large hand gently covering hers on Amara's shoulder. His touch was warm, solid, a promise. "Stay here," he said, his voice rough with feeling. It was a gentle command. It was a plea. It was everything. 6 months later, the golden hour sun spilled across the porch of a small, charming house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. It was the house Darius's parents had left him, a place he'd kept but hadn't had the heart to live in after Lena passed. Now it was filled with life, with laughter, with the smell of Naima's surprisingly good baking. Naima had not disappeared from the corporate world. Instead, she had reinvented her place in it. She'd used her severance and her considerable resources to launch the Clark Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to funding and supporting under-resourced community schools and arts programs. Her new office wasn't a glass tower. It was a small, sunlit room in a converted warehouse in their old neighborhood, shared with a team of passionate educators. She had never worked harder. She had never been happier. Darius was still the head custodian at Northwood. He had turned down Naima's offer to fund a new career path for him. "This is my work," he'd explained gently. "This is my community. I'm needed here." She had understood. His dignity was not for sale. His value was inherent. They sat together on the porch swing, a comfortable silence between them. Amara was on the floor, surrounded by crayons, humming a little tune as she worked on her latest masterpiece. She finally held it up for them to see. It was a drawing, in her signature, charmingly wobbly style. It showed 3 stick figures under a giant, smiling sun and a bright blue sky. "This is us," she announced proudly. She pointed to each figure. "This is Daddy. He's the tallest. He has brown skin, and he's strong." She pointed to the smallest figure. "This is me, a little black girl with my beads. And this," she said, her finger tracing the last figure, "is you, Naima." The figure had on a yellow dress and a cloud of natural hair. "You have brown skin, and you have a happy smile. This is our forever family." Naima's heart felt like it would burst. She looked at the drawing, at the simple, profound truth of it, as seen through a child's eyes. It wasn't about CEOs and custodians. It was about a man, a woman, and a child. A family. She looked at Darius, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He was already looking at her, his expression full of a love so deep and steady it was like the ground beneath her feet. He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a grand speech. He simply took her hand, his calloused thumb stroking her knuckles. "She's right," he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a confirmation, a proposal, a promise. "Yes," she whispered back, leaning her head on his shoulder. "She is." The narrator's voice emerged, warm and reflective, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. "Love," it seemed to say, "is not found in the boardrooms of power or the accolades of the world. It is not something you earn through achievement or acquire through status. It is something quieter, something truer. It is found in the steady hands of a good man who tends a garden. It is found in the unfiltered honesty of a child's drawing. True wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the profound, life-altering gift of being truly seen, not for what you do, but for who you are. And family is not always the one you are born into, but the one you are brave enough to choose, the one you build. One burnt pancake, one act of kindness, one quiet moment at a time. It is the family that chooses to stay forever.